All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Rise Zion. My name is Seth, and today we have Ryan back with us
Hey
in our
guys.
three-part series regarding conspiracy theories and secret combinations. Now, today we have kind of an interesting story to tell you guys. It has to do a lot with the persecution of the saints and the people who persecuted the saints in the early days of the church. And while they might profess to be, and this is kind of a part of our conspiracy theory, Ryan, isn't it? That
Yeah,
while they profess
yeah.
that they have conservative principles, a lot of them don't realize that actually many of their belief systems and structures are rooted in more progressive, more leftist ideologies.
And this is important because politics is downstream of culture. And if we want to fix our government, we need to understand who's influencing the culture. And that's always going to be in America, Protestant Christianity, because it's the largest Protestant nation on earth. Now, Protestantism has taken a pretty substantial hit in the last 25 years. They've reduced in population. General Christianity about 30% in the last 25 years. That's substantial. It says there's a problem within these religious organizations. And what I think is interesting is that you have Catholics, they're the number one largest Christian denomination in the country, followed by Southern Baptists. Then there's a General Baptist, the National Baptist Convention. And then you've got the Latter-day Saints. Latter-day Saints are the fourth largest religious denomination in the country.
Hmm.
And that is a really big deal. More big than you can imagine, because this means that Latter-day Saints represent one of the largest voting blocs in the country if they were to vote unified.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And this is substantially why the Latter-day Saints have been so heavily persecuted since the 19th century. Now, plenty want to go out and say that it was over religious differences. This is not really the case. Religion was used as an excuse, but the real reason the saints were persecuted is because they were economically and politically successful and a threat to the status quo, as it were.
Yeah.
And what we see in the religious groups is what we see echoed in the politics, both of the time and today. And it's a very fascinating topic. I want to point out, for one, it's very interesting to look at how some of these religions became so prominent, so powerful in the country. Baptists started off 400 years ago, heavily persecuted. They were not liked, although they had origins very similar to the Latter-day Saints. In fact, there was one colonist back in the mid 1600s, Roger Williams. He was a Baptist minister and a leader of the efforts in what is today Rhode Island. And he said something very interesting. He noted that there were substantial problems in the foundations of the Protestant churches of his day, even in his own, and that these would be solved with a new apostolic age that would restore the true church of Christ. Isn't that
Interesting. So he's
interesting?
predicting the restoration movement.
Predicting the restoration. Yeah, but he was a Baptist. Yeah. But somehow along the way, Baptists kind of went in a different direction altogether. And they had a big boon and success at the end of the 19th century. But it was through persecution that they grew so much. Likewise, Catholics today are the largest Christian denomination in the country, 71 million members. That's kind of hard to believe, because the next one, the Southern Baptists, only have 13 million.
Yeah.
And Latter-day Saints are only 1.2% of the population, real tiny compared.
Yeah.
Right. So Catholics definitely by far are the largest. And they were also heavily persecuted. Baptists also didn't like them. There were people of different religious denominations, whether they be Methodists, Episcopal, Presbyterians, Baptists, who were actively involved in the KKK, not necessarily because they were racist, but because they hated Catholics. And I tell you, the vitriol and blood between these groups was severe. And yet, here we are today. Catholics are the largest denomination. How did that happen? Also, likewise, the Latter-day Saints, we've been around a short time, almost 200 years now, and we have had a lot of persecution, and we've been the fastest growing church. I think it's interesting to give a call back to early Christianity, because modern Christians tend to refer to the first, second, or third century growth of Christendom across the world. It was this massive growth, like 40% in a short amount of time.
Wow.
And they often attribute this figure, this 40%, this massive growth, to the validity of the religion that was coming forth into the world in the midst of persecution. What they forget is that Latter-day Saint growth has been a one-to-one parallel in the same time period, right? And we've had the same type
Yeah.
of growth.
So they might
So
change their tune a little bit if they heard that.
might
figure.
change their tune a little bit. It's just interesting to note. The Latter-day Saints weren't persecuted because they had religious differences. Remember that Protestant Christianity today has an estimated 45,000 different denominations. And they're all divided. Why are they different denominations? Because they don't agree on what religion should look like. And yet we have these large Protestant denominations today, particularly Baptists, who go after Latter-day Saints and think that they have a right to tell us what religion should look like. Never mind that their own version of Christianity has been divided substantially and has branches that can't agree on what religion should look like.
Yeah.
So
I just love that. It's just like you guys can't be Christian because you don't believe the right thing that you need to believe.
Mm-hmm.
So
and we can't ask that question. Are they really Christians themselves? Are they holding up the values of Christianity as it came forth from the fathers of Christianity in the first, second, third centuries before it began to be corrupted by the influences of the other nations that they were coming into? And we can look no further than the political parties, because politics is downstream of culture. And culture is controlled by the religion that dominates the society. So that's Protestantism, right? Particularly Baptist is the largest. So let's consider the parties for a minute. And I want to point out that up until the 1930s, conservative politics was kind of a mess. They weren't really solidified. There was a bunch of different factions. But what did solidify the Republican Party and conservative politics really for the first time was in opposition to FDR's New Deal during the Great Depression, 1930s.
Okay.
And who was leading the charge in that conservative ideals and the opposition against FDR? It was the Latter-day Saints. It was the members of the church in Utah.
Huh. Interesting. How did they do that? How were they in opposition to that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I have a quote. This is from my book, The Saints Who Built America, but citations are here. This was a Dr. Randy Powell explaining in 2019 Cambridge University Press. He says in his research of the time period, anti-New Dealers across the nation readily latched on to the Mormon welfare plan, using it as a physical manifestation around which to construct their ideology of limited federal authority, spending, and local control, while simultaneously bringing Latter-day Saints into an alliance with conservative groups historically hostile to the religion.
I see. So what you're saying is, again, that the culture that was established from our religion influenced conservative policy.
Exactly. Okay. It goes on. It says that the shared anxieties surrounding the developing welfare state helped Mormons form the conceptual contours of modern American conservatism as it developed in opposition to New Deal liberalism. In the long term, Mormons helped lay the foundations for post-World War II religious conservatism and the creation of an ideology that shaped U.S. politics. Latter-day Saints are therefore essential to historical understandings of this dramatic transformation of American politics into the 20th century. So that's fascinating, right? It says right there, Latter-day Saints have been involved in shaping conservative politics for 100 years. Substantial, right? And that's in opposition. So was the opposition warranted? Was it just? Well, the church welfare program is amazing. It's doing substantially more and better for disasters all over the world than our own government is. FEMA is currently under fire for funneling funds into different groups and not getting the funds where they need to be going. And actually, they during the recent hurricanes this last season in the South, they actively persecuted conservatives, denying them aid, right? And the person in charge has been fired for that. But yeah, now FEMA is possibly going to be dismantled, and I don't think that too many people are crying about that.
No, that's just, well, it's crazy to me how they have these big humanitarian projects overseas sometimes.
Yeah.
And then you'll have a project and then they designate millions of dollars for it. And then only a small fraction of that actually gets sent. We're left wondering where all the rest of that money went.
Apparently, most of it doesn't even leave the U.S. It
Yeah.
gets funneled into different pockets. You know what? I have a perfect example of this. One of my favorite examples is during the Obama administration. Obama set up an organization to do cancer research, and he put his vice president, Joe Biden at the time, in charge of it. Cool. We're all for more cancer research, bettering cancer care, and curing cancer. Biden even said at the beginning of this last term in 2020 that one of his campaign promises was going to be he wanted to cure cancer.
That's right.
We never heard anything else about that, did we?
Not since, no.
Not since.
I remember that though.
But that's what he said. And during the Obama administration, this was a big part of what he did in government. Now, the federal government used taxpayer money to fund this institute, this research institute, in the tens of millions of dollars. And then Joe Biden, as the person in charge of it, he hired a bunch of friends and colleagues in government to oversee it, which is fine. He's allowed to do that. I have no problem with that, as long as they're doing a good job, right? Well, at the end of the day, all of those millions were spent and were gone. Do you know how much money actually went towards cancer research?
I know how much. Zero, huh?
Zero, not a cent was spent on research. And this is the federal government, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Efficiency in its prime. Efficiency. Well, yeah,
What
and it
can
makes
you
sense
say?
too
What can
that
you
the
say?
Latter-day Saints would be so invested in decentralized government because of how they had been treated by the government.
Right. Very much so. But there are other reasons too. We can look at both the fruit of politics and the fruit of religion, and we'll actually see that there is a parallel between them. That is to say, for example, like if you were to Google Woodrow Wilson, Google's AI might tell you something like Woodrow Wilson's Presbyterian religion was a huge part of his policies in government. Yet Woodrow Wilson was largely anti-constitution. He saw it as in the way of government progress and development. He wanted it to be recontextualized as this living document that evolves, right? And he also established the bureaucracy for the first time. He's basically the grandfather of the bureaucracy that we have today.
Yeah.
Just the other day, Elon, with an interview in the Oval Office, President Trump right next to him, he says, we don't have a democracy to save. We have a bureaucracy that needs to be dismantled so that democracy can thrive. Very important to make those distinctions and recognize what we have so we can fix it, right? But is it true then that something like the religion of a commander-in-chief is affecting, or how much is that affecting their policies and the policies of the United States? Well, we can look at a variety of examples of how particularly Baptists, but also Methodists, Presbyterians, and different religions, even Catholics today, have had impacts in government and on society and in culture. And whether or not this is a net positive or net negative is not for me to say. However, I'll point out a few things that are very interesting, because if one influences the other, then all we need to do is look at the values of the different parties to understand the values of the religions who are upholding those political institutions. I think this is a really important case study or mental exercise to go through.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're going to go through and see some of the fruits of what these religious, well, and perhaps it's even accurate to say that perhaps some of these people aren't even really active members in their church anymore, but nevertheless they were influenced by some of their beliefs. Is that accurate, or is that kind of where you're going with this?
It has to be, right? I mean, millions of people apparently left Christianity in the last 25 years.
Yeah.
A 30% decrease in their population. How many are actually active today? We don't have those figures. It's got to be very few.
Yeah.
I mean, in the LDS Church, our figures aren't all that great. However, we know from studies like Pew Research that have found that even though Latter-day Saints may have half of its membership who are regularly active, they're still more active generally as a whole than all of the next largest Christian
Yeah,
denominations.
that's what I've been trying to point out to people too. I mean, the antis with such glee and just like rubbing their hands together, saying that the church is failing, the people are not, but they don't realize that people like the church is doing a lot better than all the other religions in the United States. But
Substantially, it's not
yeah,
even close. The margins are not even close. So consider this: Democrats and Republicans, they actually have fairly similar messages. I think Democrats have a very attractive message, and they're excellent salesmen. But I also say that they have been the reigning champions of gaslighting since the Gulf of Tonkin. For your audience's reference, the Gulf of Tonkin was a false flag attack where the U.S. government used an attack on a ship, a false attack on our ship, to convince the United States people to get involved further with the Vietnam War that cost so many lives. It was an absolute disaster. We had no business being involved the way that we were. But they lied to us, right? They lied to us. And these were Democrats that did so. And it's continued throughout history. In fact, most of the wars, just about every war of the 20th century has been overseen by a Democratic president, Democratic administration. There's one exception. There's only one exception, George Bush in the Gulf War. So that's interesting, right?
would you say that the war on terror, how would you categorize that?
Well, it was started by George W. Bush, right, as a result of 9/11. And apparently we're going to get some new data on that from the Trump administration. He's going to be trying to declassify some of those documents so we can understand what happened there further. But what's interesting is George W. Bush getting involved with the war on terror was one thing. And there were mistakes made. And there were some lies told from his administration to the American people to keep them involved with it. What's also interesting to note is that there were other figures, Democratic figures, particularly Joe Biden at the time, Senator Biden, who was very involved in pushing for that war to happen.
Interesting.
Okay, so that's a bit of an aside going into the wars, but it's just one aspect of a greater picture. What I think is, and I think Jordan Peterson does some great segments on this, talking about demographics of who supports what political party and why. Well, what he tends to point out, and I think I'll just quote him, and he can back me up on this, because it's not my area of study. I'm not a social scientist. However, what he seems to point out is that single mothers or unmarried women tend to lean more to the Democratic Party. And why is that? Well, they have a really good message. What are some of the messages of the Democratic Party? It's things like equity, inclusion, fairness, looking out for the little guy, right?
Yeah.
Am I missing anything?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really nice, right?
It sounds like who wouldn't want to support those things? However, what is the reality? That's what's on paper. That's the selling point. And what I want to tell you is that it is absolutely a lie and has never been true. And people fall for this lie and they get involved with supporting this establishment of government for a variety of reasons. But just like early Protestants targeted Latter-day Saints and they used religion as the cudgel to gain political and economic favors, you have groups today, political groups, that use government the same exact way. They have a good message and they gaslight people into supporting them with promises of this or that, support for the little guy, and then they do something different. And that's a lot of what's been coming out lately with DOJ, the Trump administration, exposing different government agencies, including the FBI, FEMA, the CIA, the IRS. The EPR just recently got very exposed, funneling 20 million taxpayer dollars at the last minute of the Biden administration in order to hide a bunch of funds to continue operating in a slush fund on the side outside of government control and oversight. Very interesting. And you just see this over and over and over again. And so I'll tell you this, it's whether or not you think one party is superior to the other, Republicans and Democrats used to be the same thing. Right? They split over slavery in the 19th century, and then the Republican Party finally found its solidification in the 1930s in opposition to Democratic socialist policies. So what are the values of the Republican Party? It tends to be anti-socialism, pro-family, these conservative values that tend to be championed by most religious groups in the United States anyway, but are manifest a little bit differently. I don't know if you have thoughts to that.
Well, I think that
But,
it's really, to your point, going back to the Doge thing. Like all of these government programs were ostensibly to help the little guy. But look at how
yeah,
large they've become, and look how bloated they've become, and look how few people are now helped by them. It's
exactly.
like
Mhm.
they're these enormous behemoths of
Mhm.
just bloated government.
Exactly. Is it working? We have a whole century of data to look back on, and for me, it comes down to this. I can illustrate it super simple. Anybody can do this. Look up the top 25 worst cities in America, and now identify which political policies has run those cities.
Yeah,
All 25 of the worst cities in America have been run by Democrats since the 1980s or 60s.
yeah. They've just
So
been
40 to
run
80
into the ground,
years.
just pounded.
Yeah. These are the cities with the highest unemployment, the lowest wages, the most unemployment, the highest taxes, the lowest education rates, highest dropout rates. It's just bad all around. People are not thriving in these
Yeah.
Democratic run cities
Highest crime,
under these
highest drug
policies.
use, highest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very much so. In contrast, Utah, the most conservative state in the union, has been named the number one best state in the country to live in 2 years in a row.
Hmm.
And has always been very high on that list, top 5, top 10. And just continues to get better. In contrast with the failings of other cities and other states around it. Now, it makes you wonder, so what are the values of these different religious groups who are supporting the different economic or political parties? And so I have an interesting study I found, a Pew Research 2016, double check that, yeah, February 23rd, 2016, U.S. religious groups and their political leanings. And if you look at this chart, generally it looks fairly even. You've got a whole bunch of different religious organizations, generally speaking, the largest Christian denominations in the country, and some others. There's Judaism is represented there as well, Buddhism, Hinduism, Muslims. But even so, it tends to look fairly evenly split around down Democrat and Republican lines. That's not really true, because what you'll notice there on the far right is the independent side. Independents tend to lean more to the Democratic side anyway, as a general rule. It's not always true, it's sometimes true. And what you'll see here at the top are Latter-day Saints, Mormons, listed as 70% leaning towards Republicans. Mormons have long been the arbiters of conservative politics, conservative ideologies as a product of their religion, of their faith. And I think this is a very, very good thing, because my book, as I point out, Latter-day Saints have contributed more to the prosperity and benefit of society than any other organized group of people in the last 200 years. I have 600 pages of receipts if you want to challenge me on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, bring it on. But what you'll notice here is actually it's only the top 6 or so of those religious denominations.
Yes, which is shocking, really.
So yeah, the top 6 are the only ones that are actually truly well conservative, and all of the rest are very much on the fence, or definitely leaning Democratic. That means that the majority of our Christianity, our Protestant nation, is based on these religious values that have shaped left-leaning political values.
Left-leaning policy too.
Left-leaning policy, yeah, foreign and at home.
Yeah, I think that we forget that, yes, this country is a Christian nation, but that does apply to the Democrats as well.
Yeah.
So,
And now I made a statement that under Democratic leadership, we have all these cities that are falling apart. Conversely, you can also look at the 20 or so best cities. Most of them are Republican, by the way. Yeah, most of them. And there are some outliers on there that are Democrat listings, but they also have a history of bipartisanship. So you have to consider that as well. So then we have to consider that what is the fruit of these political parties? We've just pointed it out. So what does that mirror the same with the religious organizations? Well, we have also 200 years of history to look back on that. For most of that history, different religious groups have been heavily persecuted, like with vitriol and blood. It's almost disgusting. It's an embarrassment on U.S. history, and therefore is actually often not talked about in U.S. history books, and certainly not taught in history classes in schools. But the fact is, our American history is one of division within religion, and it's been ongoing and changing and ever evolving. They hated the Latter-day Saints, sure. They also hated other groups coming up, like the Baptists, for a long time before they became mainstream in the 20th century. They hated Catholics, especially, and now Catholics are one of the largest. Well, they are the largest Christian organization in the country. How does that happen? I think that's just an interesting thing to point out, that the most hated, the most persecuted groups are now the top 4 largest groups in the country. But it also does show you where their values truly lie. They may say they have interest in one thing, they do another. And this is the conspiracy. It's the secret combinations. It is the priestcrafts that set themselves up as a light to the world to get gain. And there's these things that will eventually lead to the second coming. And it is not a good time right before the second coming.
Yeah.
Right? And there's even these prophecies of a second U.S. Civil War coming about. And how are we going to get there? Well, it's pretty simple, I think.
Yeah.
Look at the policies of our government that are slowly eroding the U.S. spirit and energies and resources.
And fighting. I mean,
And fighting. Yeah.
our first episode that we did, we talked a lot about that prophecy, and something that I didn't talk or mention when you brought that up was there's this theme, right, where those who don't want to pick up their sword and fight one another must flee to Zion for safety.
Right.
I mean, we're already fighting with each other. We're already so divided one against another.
Very
Along
much
political lines, along religious lines. We're already fighting, guys. And swords oftentimes can be not actually killing one another. Maybe not killing physically, but spiritually with our words. And swords are often compared to words.
Yeah, the slings and arrows of ideas. Yes. Yeah. Remember, Protestant Christianity is 45,000 fractured denominations that can't agree on what religion is supposed to be, and yet they want to tell you what religion is supposed to be.
Yeah, there's a lot of division.
Okay, so I guess that's all I got for you today. Interesting.
It is an interesting
roundabout, huh?
I really appreciated you coming on the show and talking about, especially with all these current events that have been going on where these things are being revealed. Right. Things have changed so quickly just in the past few days with this new administration in the presidency, and so much has been revealed and shouted from the rooftops. And I really do believe that it is a fulfillment of Scripture. I brought this up in our first video when I was watching that video with Trump and with Elon Musk talking about how transparent they're being with posting things every single day about the things that they're discovering. I immediately thought, this is the fulfillment that the secret combinations will be shouted from the rooftops, and everybody will know it.
Well, thanks for having me on again, Seth. I appreciate it. And everybody out there, thanks for supporting this channel. Seth's doing some great work. Let's give him some love.
Thank you.
Help him get to 10,000 subscribers.
Thanks so much, Ryan. If you haven't already, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And make sure to check out Ryan's books, The Saints Who Built America. It really is really fascinating, some of the things that we've been talking about, showing how Christ's church has influenced for the better the world. Anyway, Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.
Take care.